OK, one more defense against CSRF attacks is something called the referrer header. So the idea here is that usually when you're making a CSRF attack, the victim's request usually comes from some suspicious website. So think about what a legitimate request looks like. I think I have some text for this. OK. So think about a legitimate request. If you're actually trying to subscribe to a YouTube channel, the request you're making probably came from you on youtube.com and clicking on a button that triggered the request for subscribing. That would be a legitimate request. It's coming from you. You were browsing youtube.com and you clicked a button to create the subscription. By contrast, a malicious version of subscribing might be if you get to click on evil.com and evil.com runs some JavaScript that triggers the post request. So if we could somehow tell that some users are clicking subscribe by clicking the button on YouTube, and other users are doing it by running JavaScript on evil.com, the server might be able to tell which requests are legitimate and which requests are invalid. So it turns out HTTP does have a feature that tells you how the request was made, and it's called the referrer header. And if you're telling me that this is spelled wrong, you're right. Apparently, it's a typo, and no one has ever fixed it. So it's called referrer with one R. But anyway, the referrer header tells me where the request came from. So for example, if you are on the Facebook homepage and you type your username and password, then the referrer header for that request with your username and password will say, this request was made while the user was browsing www.facebook.com. That seems pretty reasonable. By contrast, if you make a login request and you were browsing a forum instead, then the referrer URL would say, this user was on this random web forum and they triggered a login request for Facebook. That is pretty suspicious. Why would you be trying to log into Facebook when you're on this completely unrelated website? So that might be an example where the server sees this request with a very weird referrer and decides to not authorize the request and say, I'm not going to let you log in. Something seems fishy. And as another example, if you're on evil.com and evil.com runs JavaScript to make the request, then the referrer header would say, this request was triggered while the user was on evil.com. That could be a sign that something wrong is happening. So this is what the user will do. The user's browser will attach a referrer header saying where the request came from. And on the server side, it will have to check the request to see whether or not it's allowed. So how does the server know which requests are legitimate and which ones might be CSRF attacks? There's different strategies you can use. So here's one example. Maybe you say, if the user was on youtube.com when they clicked the subscribe button, that seems pretty reasonable. We will allow it. It's from the same site. The site you were on matches the request that you made. That's a pretty good sign that the request is legitimate. So if you're on the bank website and you submit a request to transfer money, that seems OK. But maybe if you were on evil.com and you made a request to transfer money, you should disallow that. So the server will actually not make the money transfer even though the user made the request. Even though the request has a cookie, we will reject it because we think something suspicious is going on. The user is somehow on evil.com and trying to send money. That might be weird. So that's a potential policy you can use. And designing this exact policy can be tricky. So as we said, coming up with this policy is a little bit tricky. And here are some examples of why it might be tricky. So one problem is that the referrer header does leak some information because it tells you what website you were browsing most recently when you made the request. So this might be bad. For example, if you're working on some top secret website, maybe apple.com, they have this internal website. I've never worked at Apple, I wouldn't know. But maybe they have this top secret internal website that's private, and they have this URL that says, oh, we're investigating iPhone competitors. Well, if you make a request on this website, the referrer header would leak that you were on this top secret URL, and now you've just revealed to everyone that this URL exists and that Apple appears to be investigating their competitors. So sometimes browsers will actually remove the referrer header and say, we don't want people looking at where the users are browsing when they make requests. So we're going to strip the refer header and delete it from the HTTP request. So maybe the browser removes it because of your privacy settings. Maybe your company removes it before the request gets sent out. And when the request reaches the server, the request doesn't have a refer header. It's blank, or the value is wrong. Well, what do? It's not so clear. What if the user just doesn't fill in the refer header at all? It's not a mandatory field that you have to fill in. Well, now it's not really clear what to do. Do you allow the request because there's no refer? Do you deny it because it might be a CSRF attack? It's not so clear. It's like fail-safe defaults. We don't really know what to do if the refer header is blank. So there are some issues with coming up with a good policy here. So some servers do this, some servers don't. And if you do choose to do this, you have to come up with a refer header policy, especially when the header is blank.